Hello, everybody. I hope everyone's excited about the Android Fireside chat we're about to have here. Now, some simple logistic things first. We only have one microphone left that is not in our system because we have so many people, so many great leaders from Android to answer questions for you. So first things first, I'm Dan Gallup, and I've been a longtime developer advocate for Android and developer of our Udacity courses. And we have amazing people from product, engineering, and UX here to answer your questions. So first, we're going to start off by having our panel introduce themselves. Now, two things before I do that. One is, again, there is one microphone. You see it there. If you want to ask questions, please line up behind the microphone, and please do ask questions, because this is all about you. We've also taken some questions from the internet, which we will be asking our panel as well. And the second thing is, please don't ask about things in the far future that our team can't comment on, as well as try not to actually call out individual panelists. They know who they are, and they can answer questions very, very well themselves. So let them figure out who's going to answer. So without further ado, our distinguished panel, and we'll start from right to left.
Which right? Stage right?
Stage right, yes.
Stage right. Okay.
Stage right.
Stage right. Hi, I'm Jeff Sharkey. I'm a software engineer on the framework team.
Chet Haas, I am an engineer on the UI Toolkit team.
Eat Boyar, also an engineer in the UI Toolkit team.
Diane Hackborn, an engineer on the framework team.
George Mount, I'm a UI engineer on the UI Toolkit team.
Romain Guy, I used to be an engineer on the UI Toolkit team.
Chris Wren, I'm an engineer on the system UI team.
Hi, I'm Rachel Garb. I'm on the UX team.
Hi, I'm Rashad Alao. I'm an engineer on the media team.
Hi, I'm Adam Powell, engineer, UI Toolkit team.
I'm Chris Baines, and I'm an engineer in developer relations.
And I'm Rafe Levine, an engineer on the UI Toolkit team.
All right, so we have an amazing panel here for you guys. It is so exciting to be up here with these people that I've worked with for the last 5+ years in many cases. All right, so I'm going to pull a question from the internet first, a nice one. All right, so this was from David. Why did the build.version codes convention change from the full Tasty Treat name to just the letter in Marshmallow?
So the answer for that is those names in there are the code names for the platform, and we don't have code names anymore. Because what happened is that early on we said, like, OK, we need a code name for our platform so we can call it something before we're done. And marketing gives it its final version number that they want to go public with. And the code names over time, as you've seen, have become more of a marketing thing than the actual version numbers. So by M now, basically marketing has taken over the name. We don't know the name before we're done with the SDK, so you end up with M.
Yeah, it really helps us from leaking things. To have none of us know what's going on. All right, so another question from the net. Again, please line up behind the mic. We'll also take some there. So they would like to know why the permission for drawing over other apps is considered dangerous and cannot be requested.
I guess I'll take that one.
Yeah, take that one too.
So the runtime permissions are designed around access to personal information. So you'll see pretty much all the runtime permissions are like the user can understand about like, oh, can the application get to this stuff about me? And so we thought that was really important for them to be able to answer these prompts that they're going to see a lot. The draw over applications is actually a really tricky one because it's a source of a lot of malware that we have. It can be abused for a lot of things. It's one of those things that's like, with great power, you can like mess up the user really well. So we really wanted to protect this more. So we really felt it was important that for the application to get this, they need to go through a little more invasive UI where we can explain to the user what this is and kind of more discourage applications from using it.
OK, here's another one. Why do you choose statics for your APIs? It makes testing so hard. I think I got the right inflection there. Anyone?
It would be interesting to know what they're talking about in particular. I know we use static methods a lot in support library as a way to then shim down to the appropriate runtime version. Like that's a mechanism for us to then delegate to the appropriate runtime bits. Other than that, I don't know specifically what they're talking about.
I thought it was just because we hate our users.
I think this is specifically relating to dependency injection, why we can't
Yeah,
support that
obviously.
more.
There's a very
easily.
serious side to this question. I do not want to trivialize this question because I know there's a lot of people want, what they do want is to make their code more testable, and we really do want to help that. So even though I wrote it because the question was kind of whiny, the actual content is quite serious.
Yeah, so I think that the comment of what more specifically that the questioner was referring to would be really useful here, just to sort of see how they're trying to instrument this and what they're trying to do. And I mean, most of these things we deal with kind of on a case-by-case basis, so it'd be great to find out a little bit more information.
Absolutely. Then this is one of the challenges with taking questions over Twitter.
So if you can get back to him and we'll wait.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, please feel free to tweet again. All right. So here's let's actually take an audience question now. So since I see a few people lined up.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for putting this event together. It's really great to have this focused, pure Android event.
Hey, come on.
Thanks for coming. Good night.
Yeah, exactly.
So my question is actually very related to the previous session about permissions, and I think it's important for everyone to know the answer. So one of the solutions to avoid asking for permissions was to use some of the system intents. For example, if you wanted to capture a picture, use the media capture action instead of asking for permission to access the camera, or if you wanted to save a contact, etc. It's been a while since I touched the camera stuff, but I remember a few years ago, basically each OEM that shipped their own camera application would would respond to that the media capture action differently. So they would return, one of them would return a thumbnail of the image in the data part of the intent. Another one would return a URI, which was probably the expected behavior, and so on. Same with I think even attaching something like some email clients or some third-party email clients or apps. Like when you try to attach something, do it one way, expect it in one way versus another. So have any of these been maybe added to the CTS to ensure that I get consistent behavior when I use the intent, the media capture intent, for example, or the other intents, or not? If not, then how do we really work around that?
That's a great question. So for the image capture stuff, you're right. As far as CTS, what's in there right now, all it does right now is assert that somebody is there that handles the intent. But what we've tried doing with some of the documents UI things, so the create document, get content intents, we've actually started using UI Automator to not just to launch the intent and to start interacting with whatever UI the OEM has presented there, to actually try picking a file and to make sure that we get back the file we expect and we're able to work with it. So we've had good success with it there with those intents, and we're starting to look at how do we extend that to some of the other ones, like the image capture, so that we can assert strongly that you as a developer get back whether it's a full resolution image or a stronger contract between you and the camera app. So we're looking at improving it.
Thank you.
All right, next audience question.
I hope this is a simple question. So what's the recommended way to sync data from an app to the server and back from the server to the app? Because, the talk this morning was talking about a way other than sync adapter, and I was looking at the Udacity classes, and they were saying sync adapter was the way. So.
Oh, it's just one thing on the Udacity classes. We wrote the Udacity class before Job Scheduler existed or GCM Network Manager existed. So that is one thing there. When we haven't updated that part of the class since then, but I'll let the rest of the panel handle that from beyond that.
I don't think we have one certain way of doing things. Job Scheduler provides a great API for when you want to be done, you want the battery full, or there's wireless network, that kind of stuff is good for them. And there's also things like my user just send a message, I want to send this to server, you better send it yourself. I think it's the best way, because you really want to send it as soon as possible. And if you rely on the rest of it, we try to bash things. That's why the job schedule is great. And otherwise, do it yourself. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that if you're looking for something that's a little bit more turnkey end-to-end that gives you kind of some higher level constructs for working with that. I think you might want to talk to some of the Firebase folks out in the sandbox area and Q&A area for office hours. They might be able to point you in a direction that has something a little bit more high level than just the raw platform constructs, just because those do provide some of the other server-side component and integration that you might look at for something like that.
Someone was mentioning something in Google Play Services that helped, like a sync, I guess Radar was? No. When we were talking?
Yeah, that's the GCM Network Manager code. And the nice thing about GCM Network Manager is that it actually does a lot of the power-saving things that we added to the platform later, but it brings it back to earlier versions of Android. So it's a very friendly thing to use in that sense. It doesn't do everything that Job Scheduler does, but it does the most important things. And a lot of people, Sync Adapter might be a little bit overkill for because they don't need the accounts part of it. They just want something that's going to start up, that's going to survive boots, and it's going to get them reliable syncing. And so something like GCM Network Manager is useful because it can do that across many versions of the platform, even before we started doing some of the battery optimizations we did later on around Sync Adapters.
I mean, like, just keep in mind, it really depends on your use case. Like, if you're trying to send analytics information, use the job schedule, GCM Network Manager. But it's like, if it's time sensitive, those things work well because they batch, like they are lazy. It's good for the device. But if you have time sensitive information, like, do it yourself. Have a job, like, there's multiple solutions out there.
Okay, thanks very much.
Excellent. I'll do one more audience question here.
Looks like a few.
Yeah. So if I can just hijack the previous statics question.
Sorry.
And it wasn't actually my question, but it's something that I've run into lately. I think Google Play Services is a really good example of that, where for things like location services, GCM Network Manager, they've all seemed to sort of standardize on static methods on everything, which does make testing really hard, especially for things like geofencing and that type of stuff.
Can you say that in a whiny voice?
Why are they static?
There we go.
That didn't work. We didn't get us an answer any faster.
I like the question.
That was good. Yeah.
So thank you for pointing out some of the Play Services libraries in particular for that. We'll definitely take that feedback to the team.
That's a great non-answer.
That was good.
All right, so Joe asks, could you discuss the new bottom navigation bar in the new Google Plus app that is only mentioned as something that is mentioned as something not to do on DAC?
Rachel, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So the Google Plus team is experimenting with new UI approaches. And they do this from time to time. Doesn't always result in a material design pattern. It hasn't resulted in a material design pattern in this case. So the feedback that you have about it is going to be very helpful to the Google Plus team and also the material design team as they decide what to do moving forward.
Yeah. Anyone? So who here doesn't like it? It's just a show of hands, just right. Okay. There's some interesting feedback there. Go on, Adam.
Is iterating like this referred to as bottom-up design then?
That's a good one.
So I mean, in all seriousness, though, I think that's really kind of the way to take it. Google's a very large organization. We have a lot of other apps teams. And as you all know from working with your teams and your designers and your product teams, all of these people have all of these other ideas that they kind of want to put forward and try things out. And I think that there's a lot of that same sort of sentiment within Google and within other Google Apps teams as well. It's part of the reason why we don't always integrate everything every Google App team does into something like the material design spec or into a support library or into any of these things immediately. Because these teams really do just kind of want to try some things and see what sticks and see what people like. And this is something that we've gotten a lot of feedback on since that particular launch. So thank you for providing that. I mean, that really is part of the process.
Awesome. All right, next audience question.
Hi. To be backward compatible, when there's new APIs, whether be in support library or Google Play services. So one of them is open source, one of the other is not. So for example, Fuse location provider, it's just about location, and not about Google services, actually. It requires GMS, of course, but which determines for new APIs to be on which?
All right, so what determines whether an API is part of Google Play services or part of the platform?
I can address it. So the location stuff in being in Google Play services actually had nothing to do with backwards compatibility or giving to other devices. It came about because as we developed the location services, originally we just had like, well, there was GPS, so that was your location, and then we did cell. And as it evolved, you do Wi-Fi-based location, we realized you can't really do modern location services on these devices without having a lot of interaction with backend servers that have a lot of data that they use to do this location stuff. So we realized the platform location APIs were becoming these kind of hollow APIs that didn't actually have any open source implementation behind them because the platform couldn't do the stuff that we were saying it would do. So that was actually the reason why location went into Google Play services, because we realized actually location is really a Google service, it's not a platform service.
Okay.
And if you want to see why, the difference between support library and Google Play services is really about that. Google Play services is Google proprietary services that basically are dependent on backend Google services. The support library is all open source code that can operate all by itself.
Thank you.
All right, so what is this about performance and enums and intdef? There has definitely been a lot of talk about it. And anyone want to comment on the panel?
Can we get everyone for one side on one side of the room and the other side on the other side of the room? Well, we can give out some water balloons or something.
I can do it if my voice comes back.
I'm not sure you can, actually.
Let me try. Okay. So originally, we just wanted to let you guys know what is the cost of an enum, so that you understand when you use them what the cost is. Just like if you use a double with a big D and you put like 1 million of them in a hash map, what is going to be the cost? Once you have that information, you can make an informed decision about whether or not to use them. Enums are great; they're super useful. You can put methods on them. There are many cases where they are useful. They exist in the platform. If you look at the source code of the framework, you'll see them used in a bunch of places. So it's really about understand the cost of everything so you can decide on a case-by-case basis. So if we ever say never use them or always use them, that's not what we mean.
So what I just heard is Romain says always use them or never use them.
Exactly, one or the other. There's no middle ground. No, it's just like with everything. Understand what you're doing. Don't do it blindly because you've been told in an article to never use them or to always use them. Just understand what's going on.
I think the most important thing by far to do is measure, and I think the thing maybe why enums are so controversial is that if you have assumptions about Java on a desktop or a server, those assumptions are not necessarily going to apply on the platforms, on the device. So, but the real answer is measure. And if the answer is it isn't really performance critical, make your code clean. And if the answer is it is on a performance hot path, then do something different than you would on a desktop.
Yeah, part of the reason why this ends up being such a topic of discussion is just because it is one of those things that tends to come out in API. And it ends up coming out in API in places where many, many parts of your code are going to call into it. And it's one of those areas that really does kind of contribute to performance death by 1,000 cuts or memory death by 1,000 cuts in one scenario or another. Any one of these things really isn't going to hurt you all that much on its own, especially if it's just kind of off the beaten path. But if it adds up and you do measure and you find out later on that, wow, I really do have a problem here, then what do you do about it? I mean, you sit down and you say to yourself, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and fix this. What does that refactoring look like if you find out that like 1 million of these things across your code base is causing a problem? So, I mean, that's part of the reason why it's one of the things that we've harped on, is just because it does tend to have that quality of high visibility across your code base, such that if you find that you have to make a change later on, it can end up being a very expensive change. So it's part of the reason why we say, measure up front and really kind of think about it and know the costs from the beginning.
I thought it was defensive, like, whoa, we're never going to use enums. We always use ints. Like, and so you guys have to do the same thing we do, right? No, it's not that?
Well, I mean, we could also just, again, like Romain says, never use them.
Okay.
Yeah.
10.
Always use them?
Yeah, the public APIs, we're being conservative because we don't know what types of apps or how you're going to be using these things. So we're careful. We don't let ourselves use enums, but in our public APIs. But that shouldn't let you from keep you from using them.
And there are
That's
actually
also
places
good.
where we use both. So the Skia drawing API is a good example. Like some of the parameters, like the transfer modes, the blending modes, they're defined as enums on the Java side. But when you create an object with one of those enums, we turn the enum into an int internally. So
So always
we
use both.
use both at the same time.
Wow. Don't follow that example. Though.
Yeah, don't do that.
Actually, the framework usage or lack thereof of enums is a good example. One of the places that we really wanted people to understand where it may bite you or your developers is in developing libraries. The reason that we don't use them in our APIs in general is that we would then inflict that damage upon your app, and we do not know what your app is going to try to do with all those APIs. So wouldn't it be better if we streamlined our APIs so that you didn't suffer repercussions that we couldn't foresee? On the same hand, if you're developing a library that is then going to be used by tons of application developers, you should think very carefully about using things like that because, again, you're making a policy decision on behalf of the users, the clients of your library. So there it becomes a lot more important instead of like, in your application, you want to use an enum, knock yourself out. I really couldn't care less. If you're writing a library, be aware of the danger before you do that and measure to make sure
if you want a great example of how not to use them, so recently PY from Square, a friend of mine, released a library called Fragnums, where he shows you how you can replace fragments with enums. Don't do that. It works.
All right, let's go to another audience question. And please, if you have questions, line up, right? We really do want to answer your questions. This is an incredibly rare thing. We haven't done one of these since 2014. So please come and line up and ask your questions.
Hi. I don't have a question. I'm here to plug my talk tomorrow about Android testing.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
We will talk about.
Couldn't see from that distance.
Yeah, we will be talking about testing in isolation. And in fact, if you're watching this on YouTube, you should just switch to the YouTube video right now.
Dan, we need a net blocker.
Exactly, I know. But yeah, and actually, there's there are questions that are going to be answered in a whole bunch of great talks we have for tomorrow. So, but don't let that stop you from actually asking questions now.
So yeah, the short answer is isolating from the framework and EMS core and everything. So
exactly. All right, next actual question.
Or you can provide an answer to someone else's question.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah, hello. So I asked this to one of the people on stage, but I wanted to broaden the question to all of you. So will there ever be style guidelines for XML resources and all the XML we write, basically? Because the SDK uses different versions. We have camel case and we have underscore and I've seen tons of different variants.
So the SDK uses a pretty consistent convention for some of this stuff. It uses the conventions based on the type of resources that they are. So Diane, if you want to jump in and
you want me to explain the convention? It's too complicated.
you do have one of these things named after you.
I can explain some of them. So in attributes, underscores. In tag names, dashes. But if the tag name is a view, then camel case.
That was perfectly clear.
And that's not even actually right.
So part of the convention came because a lot of resources come from just files on the file system. So we realized, you can't use case for those because you can be on caseless file systems and stuff. And so a lot of those get forced into just pure, lowercase with underscores, which we don't like. So we use different things elsewhere because why not? For attributes, we use the convention because attributes can either be for the child or the parent, we have the convention where it's layout underscore and then a name, or else the other name with camel case so that you can distinguish them. But yeah, the conventions are very complicated.
And the attributes mostly have the names of the setters and fields in Java. Mostly.
So what I'm hearing is maybe we should have a more discoverable point of documentation for this.
Maybe so.
We'll make a transcript of this video and publish that.
Hey, Chet, can you put that on your blog?
All right, next question, please.
All right, so without getting into sort of another enum type of discussion, which I don't want to
bring it. We can enumerate the enum discussions.
That's after. I'm curious though, what do you guys think of Kotlin in the ecosystem and potentially having a second language becoming predominant within the community?
Go.
Kotlin is completely supported, right? It completely supports Android, so that's not really an issue there, right?
There's a big difference between having like official support, as in go tick the box in your IDE and get the plugin installed and it works, versus having really idiomatic API support around it. I assume that that's what you mean, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I guess we can all kind of riff on parts of this. I mean, as a language itself, I mean, several of us have kind of looked at it and spent a little bit of time with it just in kind of some sandboxy types of environments. And it's pretty cool. I mean, they've made a lot of decisions that I think really are in keeping with certain patterns of efficiency and so on and so forth that we look for something that would be targeting mobile like this. If anyone else wants to kind of jump in from there?
Like, I'm probably the person who likes the language most here, but the problem is it's not like we use it in data binding while parsing, and we use it to prototype a lot just internally. But to put a framework support behind it is like a significant step for us. That means like what do we do with other people who wants to use Java, and what do we for the people who really cares about the differences? So it's a big decision, and I don't see the benefit of doing it. Well, you can just use Kotlin. I mean, I know so many people just writing their apps in Kotlin. And I think it's in a good state right now. Anything further is like big commitment for us. It's not easy to take.
Okay. Does it sound like it's one of those things where if it becomes largely supported within the community, it would at least be something that you would try to not actively try to break? Or, you know,
It was like a triple negative.
much. I don't think we're going to actively discourage you.
Okay. There's no animosity. Right?
Yeah.
No. I think that like there was like, for example, a few versions ago, part of the language specification was such that the code generated by Kotlin made it very difficult to do things like write custom views because you couldn't have enough overloaded view constructors to allow the inflation process to happen idiomatically, so on and so forth. And you know, they've since addressed things like that, and those are things where I think that they've definitely got their eyes on Android in a lot of ways, just as evidenced by changes like that and some of the discussions that went on around that type of change. So, I mean, I think that it'll be kind of interesting to see kind of where things go.
Yeah, but you know, several years ago, people were asking the same question about Scala, and it's going to be a bunch of different languages, so it's always going to be something new. And the thing is, the Android toolchain works. You know, it takes Java bytecode from Java C. So if the language outputs good bytecode, like should work. At least you didn't ask for C++, so that's nice.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, next question.
Yeah, it was good to hear about the new Android Development Studio features coming out. But I'm curious about what's being done for the sort of pure editor, you know, Emacs, VI kind of people. Like standalone layout viewers, or kind of, is there any focus on that, and especially guides as well, like about how to do things without like immersing yourself into the into that experience?
Just stop worrying and love the bomb, man.
we have channel Stephanie from this morning's keynote. There's no better time to start using Android.
I've used Emacs for like 20 years.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, Gradle is pretty usable from the command line. I've certainly done that. And so if you absolutely want to use your own editor, but the thing is, what's great about what we're doing with Android Studio is all of this runtime, real-time code updates, things that you can't do very easily, you know, with those kinds of tools. So I mean, we could build integrations for each one of them, but I think that it really is a great time to go out and try what we're doing with Android Studio. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Joking aside, I would definitely pose the same question to some of the tools folks tomorrow. in the
Oh yeah,
session with
that was the other thing I was saying. We have a Fireside chat with all the tools team tomorrow. So if you really want to get this kind of support available for other editors and other tool chains, definitely ask the question to them as well.
And now they'll be prepared for it.
Yeah. All right, next question.
Hello again. This might be covered in one of tomorrow's talks maybe, but I was wondering if an update on Jack and Jill might be provided, and also what the implications of that would be on using a language such as Kotlin. Thank you.
Anyone want to comment on this, or do you want to punt it till tomorrow? It's up to all of you.
Take it tomorrow. Let's punt it.
So I think it's a better. I think that's a better question for the tools team for tomorrow. Again, for the Fireside chat there. So, thanks though. We'll definitely come back.
Are we taking some of these down so that we can just feed it into the initial questions?
That's a good point.
Anybody else have any other questions for tomorrow's session?
Yeah, exactly. I can tie it. All right, next audience question, all seriousness.
Yeah, we've been doing camera work since, I don't know, early 2012, and life hasn't gotten a lot easier for us. I think that the Camera 2 APIs are great, but even on phones that support those, some of the functionality is kind of invisible, it doesn't work. I'm wondering, I understand that it's very difficult to support such a large ecosystem, but I'm wondering if you guys view that as your problem or kind of our problem. Because it's something that family members, friends, sort of refuse to use the apps we build because oftentimes the connection to the media player or the connection to the media hardware, recording, etc., is just unpredictable. And I'm wondering kind of what you guys are doing towards that, and if you do view it as your problem, or if you kind of think of Nexus as sort of your little world where you can kind of...
Oh, it's definitely an Android problem, and that's something that we've spent a lot of time trying to resolve. So the first step was bringing a new API that could enable you guys to develop great applications. So that's the first thing we did. And the second thing is basically make sure that A, it's adapted, and B, it's well tested. So on the testing side, we revamped our testing infrastructure to add additional mandatory tests around image quality and also around the APIs that are being used. If you're familiar with Camera 2, the API surface is really huge. And I think what you're seeing there is because the API surface is so large, it's hard to test all the combination of every single instance of all the parameters you can configure. We're making progress, but the coverage is far from 100%. But for us, it's a top priority, because without that, you cannot have a consistent set of applications being developed and have those applications work across the ecosystem perfectly. So we're on it. It's one step at a time, but clearly, it's a top priority to make sure that that coverage is as wide as possible to cover as many use cases as possible.
All right, next question.
Can you give us a sense on how big the Android framework team is and how it has grown the past few years?
It's all of us. That's it.
Yeah, we have to constrain the size of the team to how many people we can fit on the stage, and.
Laid off the rest. So, I mean, really, the size of the team is mostly just constrained by the size of the buildings that they give us.
It's not that constrained by that. They figured out more ways of smashing people into smaller spaces. That's all I'm saying.
Well, yes. I mean, we did have one of our other team members visiting from a remote office where there's photographic evidence of him setting up a temporary desk, which consisted of him stacking 2 empty cardboard boxes, one on top of another, next to a whiteboard on which there was a drawing of a little house plant. So we've got some constraints that we're optimizing for in that.
The team is a lot smaller than you would think.
Yeah, and I would say you could actually derive the answer to that by looking at the Git logs. You could probably work and figure out how many people are making commits and who the core members are.
And the rest of us are going to meetings. So.
All right, next question.
My question is not only about Android, but also about Chrome. We heard many things about Google may merge the Android system and the Chrome system together. Can you share something more about it? And when do we really able to build an Android app and also able to run on the Chrome system?
Well, we have Arc Welder already. So let's just say that. So if you really want to run your Android app on top of Chrome OS, we do have a solution for that. And as far as the other answer, no comment.
That would be one of those asking about the future questions.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask whether there'll be like ORM support for SQLite on Android, because we have been writing a lot of boilerplate code around it, and if it was there, it would be useful.
So maybe I can
Sure.
answer this.
Yeah.
So this is actually something I personally thought about working on. It's a little bit in the middle because there is like a bunch of really good solutions that work well. Like there's ORM libraries. I use one of them for the demo. It's a company called RAM. They're doing really cool stuff. And so we are debating whether, the community is coming up with good solutions. And we bringing one more solution to the table, unless we do something better, doesn't seem to add any value. So if we think that we can do something better, we would provide it. Otherwise, there's like great open source solutions that you can choose from.
And which one do you?
I cannot name any like that one.
Okay. And I know you told that there should not be any future feature questions, but will there be a NoSQL solutions for Android?
Same as you can use level DB. I mean, that's
I was going to say, yeah, there's open source projects that are there. I mean, I think that without expanding the framework tremendously, I think there are great opportunities out there if you don't like what we have built in, and so that's.
Yeah, it's more like we have limited. We have like 12 people in the framework, so we try to spend our resources more efficiently. So writing a key value database for Android doesn't really make sense while there are great solutions there.
It's more about providing the infrastructure that other people can build on for domain-specific solutions, right? So if what we were providing was so limited that nobody was providing these other things, or they were inherently too expensive for people to use, then clearly there's something that we can do in the infrastructure to enable that ecosystem. If that ecosystem is already enabled, what value are we adding by just adding something else to it?
Exactly. I mean, again, LevelDB is something that's pretty brilliant, and one thing we could do is make it easier to integrate that with Android as a toolkit that's available. But again, it's out there, and it's a really well supported open source project. So, next question, please.
There's some things that I end up doing in Android that kind of make me feel dirty, and there must be a better
Oh no.
Oh no. There
Things
must
in
be a
Android
better way
make
to
you feel
do
dirty.
it, but
Wait.
I look on Stack Overflow.
Is this safe for this event?
Yes.
Okay.
It's
I just want to
not
make
that
sure.
kind of dirty. And I look on Stack Overflow, and try and find a better solution, and I can't really, and the consensus there is to do it. So here's the example. It relates to the database. It's just like creating an application just to get a static context that you can pass to the SQL database if you have, if it's accessing data and its life cycle is longer than an activity. So is that something? I mean, that's the consensus of how to do it on Stack Overflow. If you just use the application context, the application goes through its life cycle, that turns null and your database crashes.
That's not true.
Yeah, it does.
No.
I was going to say, wait, hold on.
The application context is created as it's a global to the process, so it does not go away.
Yeah, in fact,
until the process goes away.
Context?
Yeah. In fact, that's the biggest problem with using the application context is that it doesn't go away. So you've got to be really careful with what you put in there.
So okay. Well, I'll take it up afterwards if I'm wrong.
I mean, it could be that
so now I
something.
feel really dirty.
She does it to us all the time. So
That's good. But most of the time, a lot of times when you're using the application context, there's probably a better solution. So that would be my other thing. If you find yourself using it, there's a good chance you are doing something dirty.
There are good reasons to use it if you want to keep things outside of your activity or whatever like that. You just need to be aware that you're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. I always thought we were okay.
Sorry. All right. Next question.
Hi, everyone. I have a question about permissions. So how to gracefully handle the situation when the user permanently denies the permission which is critical for your app. Let's say camera permission for the camera app.
I think at that point you're beyond graceful solutions. You know, it's like you now have a fundamental disagreement with your user about like whether, you know.
Well, okay, if the app uses the camera permission in the app and it's not that obvious that it's like camera app, or for example, well, as I understand, there is no technical way to see if the permission was permanently denied. Is it correct?
Well, you can certainly find if it's denied. You can just check if you have the permission.
Yeah.
No, well,
I mean, you can always go and say, you know, hey, this permission is required to run the app. I mean, that's certainly within your purview as a developer, and make very clear messaging around that.
But you don't get any kind of hint that this permission was permanently denied, right? Because in case if the permission is permanently denied, you can't show the dialog. You have to open the settings page, and user have to manually check the permission box.
Right. So I mean, you can try to get the permission again, and you'll be told that it was declined, and you can tell the user, I can't do this thing because I don't have the permission. But the idea behind this is that if the user has gone and said like, stop bugging me about this permission, you know, it's like you've kind of passed the point where you're having a good interaction with that user. You know, they're getting annoyed with your application, and we're just trying to mitigate the situation at that point. So you should be trying to be more proactive about like, when you first ask for the permission, making sure they understand why you're asking for it and that they'll agree to it. And if they don't want to at that point, they'll probably just say no. And if you keep on bothering them, then yes, they may at some point say like, stop asking me. But you know, I think at that point you're kind of past explanations to the user about what's going on.
From what you're saying, it really does seem like if the user doesn't accept the permission, they're probably not going to use your app anyway, because they're not going to get any functionality out of it. Is that right?
Yeah, because everything is around the camera. So.
Or they're going to leave a 1-star review saying that your app doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking like how to because it can happen by mistake. Because as you said, the first time you ask for permission without any explanations, you just ask because it's safe, right? Second time you explain, but maybe this explanation didn't work, and user permanently denies your permission, and then you're in the state where you don't really know, is it permanently denied or not, and what to do.
So I think you can use some parts of your UI to really try and communicate a little bit more with the user before you get into that like completely crazy state, right? So I mean, the option to permanently deny isn't available until the second time you ask, at least. So at the point where it's been denied for something like a camera app, for example, you can imagine like your normal camera preview window having instead, you know, some text that either looks like a test pattern, has an explanation, something clever, and says, you know, this is a camera app. You need to let us access the camera if you want this app to work. And try and pitch your explanation as sort of like a zero state or empty state whenever the user is looking at the data set that they would normally see if you had the permission. And this kind of applies even for beyond just camera apps as well. I was having a conversation with a developer outside just before this that was specifically around calendar events, for example. And same thing. If an application needs to access the calendar events for the day to show some sort of agenda and it can't, then you can show something meaningful in that empty state and sort of try and explain to the user, hey, normally you would see this. You're not seeing this right now because this permission was denied. Click here to fix it. And you can kind of guide the user through the steps of getting back to your intended state or not. I mean, it may just be that if it's not something completely integral to your app, then maybe they're going to go write a review about it.
It's just as understood, there is no like onboarding of this like permission settings page for the users. So if the user permanently denies the permission, he or she doesn't really know how to turn it on back, because it's not really clear that you have to go to the app settings and then you have to open this permission page and you have to check.
Then that's maybe language you need to provide to them if they get into a state where clearly they want this functionality.
Yeah, I mean, you can move from an intent into the settings page for some of this stuff too, for the application info.
And to be like realistic, this is very, very unlikely case. The rare case user really wants to use your application but said no twice and said permanently disable. By mistake, all of this happened. I think it's fine. They see a pop-up, shows how to do it, and I think it's fine.
Focus more on trying to get people to say yes the first time. Like, that's what you really want to do.
Okay, thank you.
And in the specific case of not being able to display a picture, you could optionally provide 1,000 words instead.
I think it's great to do. Thank you.
All right, next question.
First, thank you. It's about being with a lot of analysts here. So today we can do a lot with the persisting API, but why don't we have an object relational mapper in the actual API?
I want to do a quick poll. We were wondering about the answers. How many people think that we should provide something similar to an ORM or like anything on more abstraction on top of the database? Like, can I see hands? How many people think we should do this?
Who wants an Android ORM? Let's just be clear.
Count 7?
Like 10. Okay, how many people say no because there's solutions out there? Yeah, I think this is kind of what we think too. So.
Yeah.
We're data driven. There we go.
Yeah.
Other
All right, next question, please.
Hi. The next question is about the Bluetooth, so probably you don't want to hear it. So we have the switch from BlueZ to BlueDroid, and it gets worse. So basically, everybody who is using the Bule on Android, they have really huge problems. So we have behind us a lot of projects, and in all of them, we have huge problems with Bluetooth. Do you have any kind of improvements? Because a lot of people just complain about the Bluetooth on all the possibilities, groups, and so on. So, and this especially now on Bluetooth Low Energy.
We complain about it internally as well.
Yeah.
we actually, and we hear you, and that's something that we're actually actively working on to improve.
Because we discuss about beacons, we discuss about smart devices, and we work on the edge with a lot of devices, but we cannot provide the experience the people they are expecting from us because we came back all the time to, I don't know, the devices, they have a really bad implementation. And I heard the discussion that BlueZ will come back in Android. Do you have any idea about that? Okay, I can see your faces.
I can't really
disappointment
comment
on your faces too. So
yeah, I can't really comment on what's coming back, but I can tell you that that's an area of active development right now.
If you have any ideas for CTS tests to contribute, this is always a great time. If there's,
I think it's a little difficult, though.
It is,
like,
it is.
CTS is very easy to write for like a UI toolkit where you have a known input. Them's fighting words. For a known input and a known output. So, for example, the holo tests that you guys have, put some widgets on the screen. This is what the pixels should look like coming out the other side. You guys, there's CTS tests for that assert, right?
On every single device, knowing what that image should exactly look like.
Okay. So not perfect.
It was a fair assumption by someone who does no UI toolkit.
Fireside fight.
Okay, so like a database engine then, for example. There's no database up here, so we can pick on them. So like a database engine, you have known inputs and known outputs, but something where in an RF environment, where you have like multiple devices, even in this room, there's so much RF signal and interference, it's like sometimes you want that as part of a test, other times you need the radio silence. So that's really hard to come up with tests that operate in the real world.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I think that's it for our session. Does anyone want to make a closing statement? I certainly don't have one. So
I would say we're at least most of us are actually around the conference both days. So that we're kind of here to talk to people. So find us.
And also, we're going to be having another Fireside chat tomorrow with our tools team. So don't miss out on that or all the great content we have streaming tomorrow. And again, yes, come see us. We have office hours all day, and it's great to have you here. Thank you to everyone on the panel. Final act.